And if you guys have any questions, again, enter them in the chat. We do thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Kenton. Hi, Kenton. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, sounds good.
Good deal. All righty. Well, my name is Kenton Sumter. I'm an entomologist with the state of Maryland, Department of Agriculture, Plant Protection, and me and my team are exclusively responsible for spotted lanternfly suppression. Today, the focus is going to be kind of broad. I know the title of the talk was Spotted Lanternfly in Western Maryland, but I'm going to be hitting a lot of what the statewide spread of lanternfly is, some of its impacts, potential impacts, and recognized impacts, and what state's doing to try and get some level of suppression, our permitting program to try and get cooperation from businesses, municipal governments, things like that, to try and get everybody on board. And then just some fun research too, about biocontrols specifically, but also some natural predators and some things people can be doing to try and manage spotted lanternfly in their own properties. So spotted lanternfly has been around in Maryland for a little bit. It came in 2018 in Eastern Maryland, so it popped up in Cecil County. It made its way over to Washington County in, I believe, 2020, I think was the first time it was picked up. But last year was the first time that we found it in Allegany. We've had hitchhiker reports back in 2021, but nobody was able to actually confirm much anything. Unfortunately, last year, it really did wind up taking off. We had a population get discovered on the C&O Canal by the North Branch Industrial Park. And from there, it has just popped up all over Cumberland, going down 220, headed through Cresaptown, and down towards West Virginia. And then just kind of in the hills around the city too. So I wanted to go and present this to everybody. Oh, excuse me, there's a fire engine blasting down the road. Give that a second. Okay. But yeah, I wanted to present kind of what the outlook also looks like for the local area. I don't have specific location information. I'm not going to give away addresses where people are reporting lanternfly, but I do want to share kind of what the spread of the invasion looked like in the city of Cumberland at the end of last year. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get going here. And hopefully this thing doesn't auto advance. Okay. There we go. So yeah, I am the entomologist with spotted lanternfly. So if anybody is unaware, and actually considering, I imagine most of this crowd is at least Washington County, if not even further west, you guys may not be familiar with lanternfly. The population in Cumberland is still small, so it's entirely likely folks just haven't run into them. Folks in the North Branch Park have definitely seen them. So if anybody works in that area or has friends or family from that area, you may have heard stories. But these guys, just a little life history, they are leafhoppers. They're fairly large. A full-grown adult can be about 1 inch long and 1.5 inches wide, and they're sexually dimorphic, if anyone's curious. The females are larger than the males. They're not dramatically distinct in terms of like coloration or patterns or anything like that. They have the same kind of like phenotype in terms of like body coloration, but the females are bigger, and especially once they have mated and are developing eggs, that's when you'll see the really big difference. They'll appear much larger. There's lateral yellow bands that will show up on their bodies, on their abdomens, and that'll kind of give it away a bit more specifically what you're looking at. They come to us from, largely speaking, southern China, but also portions, I believe, of northeastern India. They are invasive in Southeast Asia. So specifically Vietnam, moving up through into Japan and Korea, have all experienced lanternfly invasions. They haven't had the same level of outbreak that the Eastern United States has. That could be a matter of native predators, pests, and pathogens that are controlling them in Japan and Korea and Vietnam. But also it could be a matter of transportation, available food, available host. Many different things could kind of contribute to lanternfly not being quite so much a problem. But in the East here, in the US, we are definitely experiencing some issues with lanternfly. They do only have a single generation per year. They aren't what we call, oh shoot, what's the word? Anthropogenic, is that right? Parthenogenic, that's what it is. They're not parthenogenic. Some insects can actually reproduce without sexually interacting. Lanternfly don't do that. They have to go and find a mate, they have to go and have sex, and they have to have little babies. So that is something that luckily would slow them down a little bit, but only a tiny bit. So there's plenty of insects still running around the states. They got 4 nymphal instars, a single adult life stage, and then an egg mass. And the best way to go and describe that is with this graphic right here. So right now we are talking egg masses. That's the name of the game. They got laid down last October, and they will persist until the first week in May, when we're expecting the nymphs to go ahead and hatch out. If you're looking for egg masses, and I highly recommend it, they're very easy to squish. They will typically be hidden on trees and usually up in the canopy, but they will lay their eggs on person-made structures, man-made structures. They'll lay them on vehicles, fence posts, the side of buildings, but typically it's going to be on trees, on the undersides of branches, on the side, the leeward side of a trunk or something like that. And they appear as kind of a gray splotch of mud about the size of a lanternfly, so about an inch long and an inch wide, give or take. And it'll be the eggs laid in rows on the tree with all gray wax layered over top of that. And you can just use any implement to go and run it over top and squish those eggs. We used to talk to people about scraping them, like with a credit card or something, but the risk for the eggs actually surviving that and maturing and developing on the ground still exists. So what we're really trying to tell folks to do now is to physically get something over top of the egg mass and squish it. We use paint rollers that have the roller head removed, so it's just like a little bar that's got a dog leg in it, and they're really good for just rolling over top of an egg mass and squishing. But a lot of different things work. Once the nymphs hatch out, they're very small, very hard to see. People don't typically start reporting spotted lanternfly nymphs until about July, really, because that's when they actually develop to their fourth instar, and they get big. They're about the size of a nickel. They'll turn red, and they're much more highly visible. But the nymphs tend to be on the most stuff. Once they get to be adults, they start going back to their favorite hosts. So the greatest period of host activity is going to be when they're nymphs. The greatest variety of plants that they'll go and eat is when they're nymphs. So you might find them in gardens is a big one, on berry bushes, or just in kind of random locations, as opposed to the trees they like and the plants that they like once they get to be adults. But they'll mature through the fourth instar, through summer, and about the end of July into August, you'll see the adults finish molting and be present. And that's kind of the life stage that we keep. It's the most visible one and kind of the one we keep the longest. It's the one people report to us, and it's the classic lanternfly look. Excuse me. With those kind of buff colored tan, spotted wings, the kind of marginal, striations. And then the dead giveaway is the bright red hind wing, which you can kind of see in the picture of the adult. It's the thing you notice first when you see them flying across your face, is just a brilliant scarlet hind wing, and maybe some of the yellow bands on their abdomens. But the adults will be around for July through November, pretty much. And their behavior changes. You get about later in the season, September, October. Their favorite host, the tree of heaven, will begin senescing, and they'll start moving around and swarming, looking for other hosts, looking for mates and places to lay eggs. So really the egg laying season starting in September is when you see lanternfly in a lot more places. So that's where our reports will come in, and they'll just double or triple because people are seeing lanternfly in areas that never saw them before. They're sapsuckers. They have a central proboscis in the kind of the ventral part of their body that they'll extend and stick into a tree, and they'll suck sap, photosynthate, anything you want to call it. But they don't feed on fruits the way that a stink bug would. They don't feed on leaves the way that other plants may. So they're not going to produce really obvious signs of damage in that regard. Really heavy feeding might cause kind of a yellowing of vegetation on the leaders of certain branches, maybe even dieback, but we really don't see much of that kind of thing in the field. We're looking at lanternfly. They don't girdle trees. They don't burrow through wood. They're not wood borers. So they really haven't been linked to host death, excuse me. But they are a huge source of stress on trees. And as some research I'll show in the next slide or two here, they're actually fully capable of suppressing photosynthesis in the plants that they feed on. The feeding doesn't seem to be a primary means of mortality, a primary source of mortality, but they're a stressor, and they're definitely not good for the plants that they feed on. Their preferred host is Ailanthus altissima. That's the tree of heaven. Cumberland has a lot of tree of heaven, and that's probably why lanternfly is finding a decent home there, is because there's so much of it. It is also an East Asian invasive non-native tree. There it goes. And it's I guess I always just kind of imagine let them fight. If tree of heaven and lanternfly are going to go and be mutual, and the lanternfly have actually sometimes been shown to kill tree of heaven, then let them at it. If they kill their hosts, that's the way that nature intended. But it's a good thing to look for if you're trying to find spotted lanternfly, to keep your eyes peeled for a tree of heaven. If anyone's unfamiliar with tree of heaven, it's easily distinguishable by its kind of smooth tan bark, a long compound leaf. I think it's got like a dozen leaflets on each compound leaf. It smells like kind of rotten peanut butter, or just kind of very strong peanut buttery scent when you damage it. It grows like crazy. It's in big thickets, frequently in areas of high disturbance. So along the rail yards in Cumberland is a very easy place to find easy place to find tree of heaven. But it's known to grow just about anywhere. The secondary hosts are broad. I was conservative with 70+ plant species in North America, but I think the number's up to like 100 or more now at this point. But of particular interest to lanternfly is going to be wild and cultivated grape. Black walnut is very popular. Later in the season, once tree of heaven begins to senesce, silver maples and red maples are very popular. And then all season willows are frequently popular, and eastern white pine. And those are the ones we keep an eye out for when we're surveying and looking for lanternfly, are those particular secondary species, because you can't look at every tree, but it's worth it having those in mind if you're looking for lanternfly. There are signs of feeding that one can keep an eye out for, and that's things like honeydew is a big one. When these insects feed, they'll excrete honeydew out of their back ends, and it's just kind of a sugar water mixture. But you'll see vegetation around the base of a tree can be wet. If it's hanging out over a parking lot, you'll see the asphalt is wet. You might see sap running from wounds where lanternfly, where they congregate and feed, sap might start running. And then sooty mold growing is another one too. It's just a naturally occurring mold in the environment, but when it's got a lot of food laying on the ground in the form of honeydew, it can start growing more substantially, and you'll see trees or plants with that kind of a dark black sootiness over top of them where lanternfly may be feeding. So the impacts of lanternfly are, I guess, threefold. The first is as a direct impact on state agriculture. Pennsylvania Department of Ag went and put together a cost estimate back in 2019 that puts it in the hundreds of millions of dollars for lanternfly to potentially cause damage. We've not done any kind of actual impact assessment for Maryland, but we do have anecdotal evidence that eastern vineyards are suffering. They attack vineyards as so aggressively. It's the commodity that we're really worried about is our vineyards. But we have anecdotal evidence that they're suffering a little bit out there. And that's kind of why the state's focusing its efforts as far as suppression goes on our vineyards. But it extends to other industries too, especially vineyards, nurseries, orchards, and even forestry and forest systems, ecosystems, because lanternfly has been found to reduce or suppress photosynthesis in maples that it feeds on. It's in forest stands, it's feeding on them. We know it's a forest pest. We don't know what effects it's having. We're not seeing dieback of trees. We're not seeing loss of trees, but it's certainly another stressor that these plants have to go and deal with. So as it's an economic threat, it's an ecological threat. And then honestly, one of the biggest ones, at least when it comes to its relationship with human beings, is that it's a public nuisance. Where it is heavy, people have a very hard time living beside it. And these two pictures are from PA. The one on the left is from Temple University. And the other, I don't know where is exactly, but that's just thousands of lanternflies coating a tree, feeding on it. So people like over in Eastern Maryland tell me they can't step outside. They can't enjoy a night outside because lanternfly are so thick. The lanternflies will be plastering their house. Sooty mold will be growing over buildings or vehicles. Bees and ants will be attracted to the honeydew, so they'll be stinging, biting insects around. And this lanternfly themselves just constantly jump and hop and fly and bounce into you. So they're really a huge public nuisance, and will get themselves just like closely tied in with human communities. The grape stuff isn't so pertinent, I imagine, for this group, but suffice to say that the more lanternfly you have feeding, the greater loss the vine is going to experience. The insects are stealing photosynthate, they're stealing carbohydrates from these plants, impacting the production of what was it here in the middle of this, of starch, the building of starches. And the real threat is that the plants have significantly reduced winter hardiness. So they might have loss of crop, they might have fewer smaller grapes, but the real risk is they don't survive the winter. And some older, less healthy vineyards in Pennsylvania have actually lost vines from feeding. So it behooves vineyard owners to be really proactive with lanternfly management to try and limit the impacts of the insects. And the magic number seems to be about 8 insects per stem to really start seeing severe impacts. And these are just some of the things I'll be going through, but we don't have to waste time on that. This map is from New York State IPM. I highly recommend anybody who's interested. All the states go and report to New York because they just decided to go put together a big invasion map. So we're all kind of taking advantage of it. But this is the invasion of lanternfly, where established populations are, where states have quarantines that have been issued, and even where hitchhikers have been found. And as you can see, it is persistent throughout the entire mid-Atlantic, going up into New England, on the Great Lakes. It's trying to push its way out into the Midwest. It's as far south as North Carolina. And we've got hitchhikers that have been delivered, I think, to like, excuse me, I think Arizona has received hitchhikers before that, like, they will get out there, usually arrive dead, but they will get out there. Actually, I want to say Kentucky had received some too, but I don't see them on the map, so maybe I'm misinformed. The Maryland quarantine map here is actually inaccurate. I've got the correct one on the next slide. But I'll just go and email these people and let them know they need to change their map a little. But this is worth looking at if folks are interested where lanternfly are, where states have found reproducing populations, and where the current quarantines are. It's always handy to check out, and they update it about monthly or bi-monthly, so it's a pretty good resource. But this is the Maryland quarantine. This is what's really pertinent for business owners especially, but also residents driving around or government agencies that are doing their operations in the state in each individual county. This, as you can see by the color code, has changed over the course of several years. It started off up in the northeastern part of the state and has been expanded over the last couple of years to encompass 18 counties now. So it's a majority of the state has been quarantined. And just this last, this month, March and 6th, we went ahead and enacted the newest quarantine and included Allegany County inside of that quarantine because it's got such a big population in Cumberland. But the kind of the rules around the quarantine order are for businesses primarily. We want businesses to be aware that they need to be permitted. And I'll have a future slide about that. But basically, we want businesses to acquire a permit if they are doing business inside of a quarantine area and they're moving regulated articles from the quarantine area or within the quarantine area. And unfortunately, a regulated article can be just about anything, but it really is pertaining to things that you're hauling around, big cargo shipments. We want those to be covered, we want them to be inspected. We want a representative from a company to receive this training and then to train their coworkers on identification and management of lanternfly. And hopefully if everyone knows what it looks like, they're inspecting their vehicles, they're keeping inspection records, and they're killing these insects when they find them, then we can slow the spread and they won't wind up in new locations. The Penn State University has the training put together. I'll have a link to that in the later in the slide, but it's just I think it's a 2-hour video, and 2 hours I think is generous, like it's not that long. But it's a video, there's a test at the end, the permit is issued, there's no recertification process. Once you got it, you got it. It's all free. And from there, you just need to go and display it in the business location, display it in any vehicle that's driving around, and then you're pretty well set. And for residents, we're asking folks to ideally go online, get our checklist, and make sure at least that you're trying to keep an eye on all these items on the checklist. Keep an eye out for lanternfly if you're driving through areas where you know that they're present. There's no enforcement going on of the resident checklist. It is an honor system. We hope that people will give lanternfly a thought and keep an eye out for it, glance over your vehicles for it, and just try and kill it when you find it. Because this is where it stands right now in terms of invasion, where we found reproducing populations. And this basically mirrors the quarantine map, but it gives you an indication of where lanternfly is light and where it's heavy. And yeah, unfortunately, Allegany's population in Cumberland is approaching something I would consider fairly large and well established. This is part of our online reporting system. So we instituted this in 2021 when I came on, and this is part of the ArcGIS Online Survey 123. We have this up on our website, and basically if people see lanternfly, they can go online through mobile or through desktop browser, and they can submit a sighting report. And we're hoping they put accurate location, so they put their point right where they found lanternfly. They don't let it sit somewhere strange, like in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. But this lets us track the infestation, lets us respond if we can to places where new lanternfly populations are popping up, and it's just overall a very helpful tool. It's not a tool for answering questions. If you do have questions, we ask that you go and email us or call us. This is purely for reporting spotted lanternfly sightings. But January through hatch of last year, so this is just the very beginning of the year last year, we had reports that were letting us know that nymphs were popping out or that old egg masses had been found. This then is in June, so people are seeing nymphs and letting us know where they're moving. You can see where the major population centers are for lanternfly. It's going to be Susquehanna, Harford County, kind of eastern Harford County, and then all around Hagerstown. Hagerstown is one of the worst places in the state for lanternfly, but spreading out down towards Williamsport and Smithsburg. Then we had some hitchhikers pop up around the Cumberland area, I believe. Oh no, I'm sorry. Actually, this was the first discovery down the towpath in Cumberland. So we also had them and Rocky Gap. That was in July when the adults are coming out. You can see the invasion reaches down through Baltimore City, going down 270 into Montgomery County, and then like widely scattered hitchhikers down through like Charles and Anne Arundel and things like that. So it gets transmitted pretty quickly. We try and investigate these far-flung sightings and actually determine if there's any lanternfly there. And then in August is when the infestation in Cumberland gets going. We have hitchhikers getting delivered out all the way to Oakland, or I'm sorry, McHenry. It's worth, if you go out that way, like they can pop up at those chalets out there, those little resort homes. They've been discovered. So luckily there's no reproducing population as far as we know of, but they're getting shipped all the way across Western Maryland. We'll come back. In September, they're beginning to swarm. We're, just tons and tons of reports right now. We try and confirm stuff again that's far away, but you can see the invasion in central Maryland and even in Cumberland is pretty heavy. That's why we've chosen to focus on vineyards, because a general suppression program just isn't a realistic thing that we can actually contribute to and accomplish. And through October, November, and then December at the end of last year. And this is what our invasion looks like. This is 11,500 responses from Marylanders. Sometimes it's the same person, so it's not a unique response, but it's a lot. And this is why we ask people not to go and post questions, because we can't respond to questions. We've got almost 12,000 responses, and likely if you ask us a question, it gets lost in the mix. We use this for high-level observation. But this is what Cumberland looks like. There's obviously no locational information here, but you can see where people are reporting lanternfly, and it's kind of widely scattered. I mean, you've got stuff all the way out to LaVale, and down through Cressup Town, over towards Rawlings, but then out into the hillsides, through Bryce Hollow, even towards Bear Hill. We've got, and I've actually driven out there and confirmed location of some of these guys, that it is widely distributed in residential areas in the city and outside the city. But if anyone's curious, the very heaviest infestations are at North Branch, the industrial park there, the towpath going around, excuse me, going around North Branch Industrial Park. That's where most of them are located. But we're going to go out in a few weeks here and see if we can't kind of ID where more lanternfly are. So if you find yourself in the city and you see some tree of heaven, there might be a lanternfly on it. It's worth stomping on them if you see them, and report. Let us know where you're finding it. There's a couple of things that we do, and other residents can do too, as far as monitoring and management goes. We use traps for monitoring. We'll put them in areas we think lanternfly might be showing up, and we'll try and find tree of heaven or another host tree and see if we can't catch the bugs and find out where they're going. We've never tried to use traps as a management tool because we'd have to put up hundreds or thousands of traps to go and make an actual impact at the level we need. But I always recommend that residents go and try trapping. I am not a chemical guy, so I really don't recommend chemicals against lanternfly unless you really, really want to or really, really feel you need to. But traps are nice because that's a management tool that is passive. These circle traps in particular with mesh and the bags don't tend to catch like birds and mice and frogs and everything else the way that like a sticky band trap would. So I think it's a great way to go and get some passive management without too much effort, without having to go out and like smack lanternflies or spray chemicals on them. There's DIY stuff. Penn State University has their extension service has a good video on crafting your own. We purchase ours for about $18 each from a company called Great Lakes IPM, and they've been pretty good. The traps are a little finicky. They're kind of wimpy put together, so you got to baby them a little bit. But if you find a good tree that lanternfly are congregating on, put the trap around the tree and then just check on it every week or two. You'll kill some bugs. And research has shown you don't need any kind of insecticide inside the bag. We use it just to make sure stuff dies, but lanternfly aren't good at getting out of those little Mylar bags. So, or Ziploc bag or whatever you use. So they don't typically survive once they get stuck in there. You can use sticky bands. This one has bug barrier, which can be expensive, but it's got batting and a plastic cover that keeps other things from getting stuck inside. Where I would recommend adhesive traps is actually early in the season. So if you want to go for that, I've seen people use duct tape, seen people use bug barrier. We used to use bug barrier, we do not anymore. But it's also a bad look for the state to like catch, birds on the sides of trees. So we stopped doing that. I recommend early in the season, if you want to use sticky bands, is the best time to do it. The nymphs are really terrible at climbing and fall all the time and have to go and climb back up the tree or the bush that they're on. So if you use a sticky band and place it like a couple inches off the base, like still around the root flare, you will catch nymphs and hopefully kill many, many of them as they fall, climb back up, fall, climb back up. If you're diligent in using a sticky band around the base of the tree in like May and June, you could really probably get some good lanternfly mortality from that. Now your neighbor's property might not be the same way, but you do what you do on yours and hopefully you kill them. For really good management, killing egg masses is always the best. There's like 30 to 50 eggs per mass. So if you really want to get your good management going on, find and destroy egg masses. And this is just the DIY. You can make it out of window screens and plywood and Ziplocs if you want. This is just the link for PSU's DIY circle trap, but you could type in Penn State DIY circle trap and find it pretty quickly. This doesn't pertain too much to residents, but this is just the state delineation stuff. When we receive complaints, we'll go out and try and find things, but it really is limited now to about vineyards and satellite populations, far-flung populations. We used to try and check up on everything, but we just can't anymore. There's simply too many. So if people are calling us, asking for us to come out and look at stuff, likely, unless you're in a really novel location, we just can't. So it's going to be on individual Maryland residents to try and identify lanternfly and manage their own lanternfly. We'll always take pictures over email and look at them and try and ID stuff, but yeah, management falls down to individual residents. Treatment-wise, there are 3 different types. Mechanical is the one I always recommend. It's going to be killing stuff by hand. Traps, squishing eggs, squishing adults and nymphs. People use lots of implements. I've seen fly swatters, tennis rackets, salt guns, vacuums is a big one that New York is actually using right now. I think they're electric maybe, but big vacuums to suck the bugs into the vacuum. And typically they get destroyed by the whatever the intake fan as stuff's coming in. So that's pretty good. But the mechanical means is going to be the most environmentally friendly, less impact, less exposure to you, the most physical health friendly of any of these. But it's also the most time intensive, and you also aren't going to get all the lanternfly and all the egg masses. So it's another one of those things where I have to reiterate that when lanternfly comes, it comes to stay, and that I think you're better off killing the bugs that you can find. Go on the warpath as much as you want hunting for egg masses and adults and nymphs, but learn to live with lanternfly and try to keep it to adult roar and try and make sure you're not accidentally transporting it somewhere new. And that's going to be kind of the baseline management level. Chemical options are always available. Depends upon what you want to spray and how crazy you're feeling, but you are going to have the option of either contact insecticides or systemic insecticides. If you got to pick each one, I'd say go with contacts, because systemics are a thing that you would actually spray on the tree or inject into a tree or a plant that would absorb it. It would systematize throughout the tree's tissues, and then any insect that fed on it would die. And that's really easy to make a huge ecological impact, especially if you're doing that to native trees. I never would recommend that if somebody had a bunch of lanternfly and a black walnut, do not shoot like a systemic insecticide into that tree. Like, don't hire a company to go do that, because you'll kill every single thing that feeds on it. Those chemicals will find their way into flowers and fruits and any other animal that feeds on the tree, its fruits, or the dead lanternflies is going to be intaking that chemical. And then you just have the issue of bioaccumulation as you move up the food chain. So I really do not recommend using systemics on native tree species. We do on Tree of Heaven exclusively, only after the females are done flowering. So that's after June. We'll use systemics on Tree of Heaven, and we try and make a small impact that way. Contacts are going to be lots of things like pyrethroids, broad spectrum insecticides. There is no lanternfly specific bug spray. I know there's one being marketed right now, but it's still just a general. I think it might even be, I think it's like beta-cyfluthrin or something. It's just a broad spectrum insecticide that kills them dead. it's going to be the case of needing to be judicious with sprays. Find concentrations of adults or nymphs and hit them. And don't like do big boundary sprays. Don't spray your grass. Don't spray stuff that doesn't have lanternfly on it. These chemicals will kill anything they touch, and there are native predators that are going after them. So you don't want to poison them. I'm sure as soon as you started spraying, you would start discovering wheel bugs and praying mantises and other things, predatory stink bugs that were eating the lanternfly. And we'd rather have them doing that than our chemicals doing our work for us. And then there's also dormant oils and horticultural oils. There are some options that are less environmentally impactful. Insecticidal soaps, even neem oil, although neem oil can be pretty toxic in water. So you want to be careful you're not spraying that where the water table's high, or you're just near a body of water. It can be very toxic to aquatic invertebrates. Dormant oils can be used, especially on egg masses, is real good. It's fairly safe. The one that we use is based on soybean oil. It's called Golden Pest Spray Oil, and it's pretty effective. I can't make recommendations because I'm a regulatory person. I can't go and advocate for one company. So I'll tell you that there are also mineral oils that are available that are very good. And they may have directions for how to go and mix to go and treat egg masses. Always follow your labels, label all the time. It's the law. And some things will come pre-mixed. Anything you buy at a hardware store or a garden store is going to be for residential use. If it's labeled as restricted, then you will either need a private pesticide applicator's license, or you got to hire somebody who has a commercial applicator's license. That's state law, and you want to check in with our pesticide regulation folks to see about taking a test if you want to. I think it's over $100 or maybe several $100s to do a private applicator's license, but that would then allow you to purchase and use restricted chemicals if that's something you wanted to do. Again, I don't super recommend that as your first line of defense, but it's your property and you can do with it as you will. The last one is cultural controls. This one's more dubious. We used to recommend that people try and remove Tree of Heaven, but honestly, lanternfly has so many hosts that likely if you go and remove something that you see them feeding on, they're going to move to you're going to put pressure on a different plant. So you can get rid of Tree of Heaven. It's an invasive. I mean, I never would say you should keep it, but it's also a big cost. Getting rid of invasives can be a big battle unto itself. And when it comes to removing native hosts, people have told me they've cut down maple trees or black walnuts because they've had lanternfly on them. And I really don't recommend that. The lanternfly aren't linked to that tree. If you cut down the tree, they're not all going to die. They're just going to fly to a new tree. Yeah, cultural things, I wouldn't put at the top of the list either. I would still stick with mechanical options for a management tool. As far as what state does, just real quick, we're doing vineyards. We're not doing residential treatments. We're not doing large scale business treatments. We are doing vineyards, and then wherever lanternfly is popping up in new locations to try and slow them down. We might be around the Cumberland area. We did hit the North Branch Park last year, but we're not going to be going house to house, community to community, trying to find these bugs. And there's some concerns too. This is something really for using chemicals, is all these things you want to keep in mind. The idea of reinfestation. If you go and do a big treatment, how fast are they just going to wind up coming back? What kind of transportation pathways are they using to arrive at your location? And for us, it's all about public cooperation. So we never just walk into a place and start spraying. We get a legal agreement, we schedule with the public, and then we come out and do our thing. We do lots of outreach, just like this. We're always game for appearances, training, things like that. We're always looking for new ways to go and get our message out there. We've just started doing stuff like geofencing online and advertising, on billboards, and it's been really good. So I'm encouraged by what we're able to go and do. This was on Route 50 going out to the Eastern Shore. So I want to put more of these out. And it'd be nice to get a billboard up around Cumberland too. Maybe if there's one available over the interstate. They can be very expensive, but they can be very good too for letting people know what's going on. But you may see one of these pop up in July or August as lanternfly adults start molting, and lots of people see them. And apparently some companies don't take down their billboards until you get a new one. So we've had this one up. I think it might still be up, which is pretty good value for your money, I suppose. And we do lots of goodies. I think I send so many things out, but I think I've sent stuff to UME's office in Allegany County for distribution. If not, you guys can certainly take some, but we have stuff like pens, squishy bugs, pest alerts, crossword puzzles. Just we have a lot of fun things to go and get out to people to let them know what's going on, and lots of events that we attend to. This is just some of the things we get into. We get lots of impressions from our adult campaigns. People are less concerned about egg masses, but I would like to go and make it a point to get Cumberland in part of our geofencing campaign. So if you see us, you might keep your eyes peeled for us online. This is our website. It can be a bit of a goose to navigate. I've tried to make it approachable, but it's formatted in a way that's just not conducive to good user interface. But at the very top, as you log into this page, you'll see our link to our survey. And you just click on that. You will need a photograph to go and submit a survey report, or submit a sighting report rather. But it's front and center, and it'll take you right to it. And you can let us know everything. We got a lot of information you can put in. Some is required, a lot of it isn't. The only thing I ask is please have a photo of the insects that you see and not a stock image of something random, just so you can submit. And then really try and be accurate with where you're placing that point on the map, so we know where lanternfly are, because sometimes we get stuff where people will do it and the program will ask where your phone is. It'll ask for geolocation. So we'll get like somebody's house when they saw lanternfly in like, where is it? Is it Constitution Park, I think, is in the middle of the city. And it's like, we need to know if it's there because we need to go to the park and talk to them, as opposed to, your house where lanternfly isn't. Lots of emails, lots of phone calls. That's why we're asking for people with management questions, permit questions, quarantine questions to go and call us or email us. And if it's sightings, just do it through the survey online. That's the place to do that. For permits, if people are running businesses that fall within the purview, if you're moving those regulated articles, it can't hurt you to get a permit. It's free, and it's not a target we're trying to paint on people's backs. If somebody were to be in regulatory violation, what we try and do is go to that business and that person and work on a management plan. We don't just willy-nilly hand out civil penalties. And in fact, we haven't handed out a single civil penalty. So that's not a tool that we really want to use. We want to get people managing lanternfly. We don't want people to feel like they can't report it because they're just going to have us come down and gig them for $500 each time, or destroy their products because they got lanternfly on them. But the permitting training, you can follow that link. When you get to the Penn State site, you just select it from a little menu of the class that you want, and then you go and do it. And yeah, there's no recertification process. It's still, yeah, here we go. This is all the information with it. It's still kind of eternal. And then we just hope that you are developing a training program at your business. You're keeping records of inspections and the methods you took to kill the lanternfly. You're displaying that permit at your place of business and in the vehicles. And yeah, then if a new person comes on and replaces you, that you let them know they need to get lanternfly trained too. So we have the current information with who's actually the designated lanternfly person at each business. So for 2023, this is just kind of a rundown of stuff that we're expecting. The quarantine will likely expand. It did expand. I need to update this list. Our treatment priorities for the state are going to be our agricultural sectors, so orchards, nurseries, and especially vineyards. We want to do a lot more outreach. I really want to turn more funding towards outreach efforts, just to try and get the word out there so that people are proactively looking for lanternfly and destroying it when they find it. It doesn't help us to have people not recognize it. And many times people just don't know what they're looking at when they see it. And then lanternfly will expand. There'll be more of it. There's some indications that people in Cecil are seeing less. Same for like people in Pennsylvania, where there's been a lot of bugs historically that they're seeing less. But most of the areas like Cumberland is just going to see more lanternfly this year. There's a lot of food. The weather's not been bad. Unless summer is just the driest, hottest drought, I would expect a lot of insects to be running around. Now, if anyone here is familiar with different kind of controls that get used, biocontrols are a big one. It's kind of the gold standard, or the goal. The highest goal for us when we're trying to go and manage pests is to find something that will eat them on its own. We'll hunt it down and parasitize it or devour it without us having to go do it. So there's a couple of different species, and nothing has really shown a lot of promise yet. The O. Incertus cuvani has been imported from long ago to go control spongy moth, which is now officially spongy moth. It's no longer gypsy moth. But that was imported for spongy and does parasitize lanternfly a little bit. So that's cool. The Anastatus orientalis, it's got such a wide host range. In labs, it's been shown to go after some moths, some leps that we don't want to see parasitized. We don't know what it would look like out in the wild, but we can have trouble rearing it. it's not really the host range we're looking for. It may not be an appropriate parasitoid biocontrol for lanternfly. And then dryness is more promising in a way. It just needs to be rearable in the lab and more work done on it. They go after early instars as opposed to eggs. So that's kind of an interesting development. But biocontrols can take a long time to get going. So there's no real fast movement on this yet. Fungus is kind of a cool thing. Entomopathogenic fungi are handy. Trying to get them to transmit is a little more difficult than like a parasitoid wasp, because the wasp can just fly off and find stuff. But if for those of you that don't know, like spongy moth has been controlled in a significant way by an entomopathogenic fungus that is now kind of naturally occurring. It's been found to be naturally occurring. So that's cool. There's a couple that have popped up: Bavaria, Cordyceps, Metarhizium, and Batcoa. Of all of these, the Bavaria bassiana is the one that's really shown the most repeated lethality, is the easiest to go and spread. It's actually available, as I understand it, for residents to purchase and use the biopesticide without a need for a license. It's still entomopathogenic. You're going to kill other bugs by spreading Bavaria. But if you want to try it, especially if you've got kind of a moist protected property, you could give the Bavaria a shot for managing lanternfly. I'd be curious to know. It's very lethal, especially to males. I don't know why. The females are just slightly more resistant to it, but it kills them both dead. So that's the one. The others just don't occur enough in nature to be naturally a good natural control. And Batcoa just doesn't reproduce. It doesn't produce resting spores. So what are you going to do? It infects them and then just won't make spores to go and reproduce itself off of them. So that kind of makes it a non-starter. There are native predators. If people are curious, pretty much large insectivorous birds can eat them. Spiders will eat them. Wheel bugs, assassin bugs will eat them. And praying mantises, we know big generalist predators will go after them. Don't discount the natives. That's why I recommend don't spray chemicals, because you might kill these guys. We also heard that like domesticated birds, like chickens and stuff, will kill and eat lanternfly. If you're looking for mantids, try and promote those little Carolinas. I know there's a lot of invasive Chinese mantids that are not desirable, but I guess at the end of the day, if you see a praying mantis eating lanternfly, it's probably better to have the praying mantis than it is to have the lanternfly. So no reason to squish Chinese mantids for killing lanternflies. But yeah, that's kind of where our natives stand right now. We've not singled out any one native as being the best opponent to lanternfly, but they're working on it. They're doing what they do. So to kind of wrap up here, some things the public can do to help us out with lanternfly. First is familiarize yourself with it, especially for you folks in Cumberland. I guess we're actually roping in master gardeners from Allegany and Garrett. With lanternfly so new to the area, know what it looks like, know what each life stage looks like. And if you're at all curious, like email us on the Don't Bug email and send pictures, and we'll try and identify it. And if you find it, we'll run right out there and see where it is. Probably not if you find it in Cumberland, but if you find it like out in, Deep Creek, we definitely want to know about it. Want to see if it's surviving. Report your sightings online to us. Honestly, if you're finding it out in Garrett, just call us or email us. Like, I'd rather find out about it as soon as possible, but also report it online too. Destroy all lanternfly that you find. For Garrett County, that is outside the quarantine, we would like a voucher specimen if you find one to go and actually, we have to send it to USDA. It's just a thing. Otherwise, if you find them in Allegany, just crush them, destroy them, and get rid of them. We've already got our voucher specimens for that county. Then the last thing is get permitted. Anybody can get permitted. It's good for residents. Like, we all in the department get permitted. And it's a good educational video. There's no cost. You're not going to go on like a weird, it's not going to mess anything up if you're not a business and you're getting a permit. It's worth doing. And yeah, so that's kind of the steps that one could take to kind of help out as much as they can with lanternfly. Check your vehicles. That's another big one. Sanitize your vehicles, give them a once over, make sure you're not accidentally hitchhiking lanternfly from an infested area to a new area. And this is a link to our website. It's a terrible URL. I always tell people, just search MDA spotted lanternfly, and we should be the first ones to pop up on your search results. don'tbug.md@maryland.gov is our general email for everything. So shoot it there. We check it. We respond to every email. It might take a while. Once the season really gets busy, we can have hundreds of emails a day. And that office phone number, goes to the plant protection office. So if you need to leave a message, you'll go down the phone tree and actually leave it for the spotted lanternfly group. But if you get the receptionist, they'll send you in the right direction too. If you call and are confused why it's not a lanternfly person picking up, that's because it's just our office phone. But yeah, that's it for lanternfly from me. It's kind of what's going on in the state and what's going on in Western Maryland. And if anyone's got questions, I see 6 things in chat. So let's see if there's anything that wants to be answered. I'm ready for it.
Yeah, Kenton, it looks like there was one question. You kind of addressed it, but just should I keep my tree of heaven to lure them away from my maples? So you kind of talked about, not doing that, but I don't know, if it's keeping them away from their good maples. What are your thoughts?
So we used to actually do that. We call it the trap tree method. And the idea is that you have, sometimes you'll get rid of other tree of heaven and keep like one stem left over, with the idea that then you would apply a systemic insecticide to it and all the lanternfly would be attracted to it and would eat it and would die. And I don't know that they're smart enough to recognize trap trees and start abandoning them. They very well may. I mean, these insects are adaptive, so it might not be a method that works all the time, but it could work if you have the resources to do it. Yeah, in all likelihood, if you've got tree of heaven on your property and lanternfly are really harassing them, it probably is reducing pressure on other trees around you. I'm sure it's not pleasant to have all those lanternflies nearby, but yeah. The thing with it comes to maples is that they're gonna go to those maples eventually, especially red and silver, because tree of heaven senesces early in September, and they'll leave tree of heaven and they'll start going to red and silvers in particular. And yeah, it's inevitable. But you have something else, like it seems like sugar maples, for whatever reason, they don't care so much about, which is strange to me. And like Norway maples, they don't seem to bother all that much either. Let's see. Gosh, that's a hard one to answer. So I want to buy 2 new young maples since young trees can be more susceptible. Should you not buy the secondary hosts? I guess the first question would be is if you have tree of heaven and lanternfly on your property, they would probably eventually wind up on those maples and feed on them. Okay, that's you do, yep. So I would expect those maples would be fed on. Probably wouldn't be killed, but they might need some extra love in terms of just maintaining good growing conditions. And especially as they're small, if you want to kill lanternfly on them, especially if you want to use like a horticultural oil maybe, and spray lanternfly when you see them, that would kind of reduce the harm to the environment, the tree, and kill those lanternfly that try to feed on it. So yeah, we've not seen ornamentals or garden plants or anything die from lanternfly feeding. I would expect those trees could still lead healthy lives, even with lanternfly being nearby. But yeah, I would say go ahead and buy the secondaries, just expect them to be fed on.
Okay, Kenton. So one question I had early on when they started telling us about this pest, they said that it had to feed on tree of heaven at one point in its life to reproduce. Do you know if that's true for these bugs?
I think that might have been a guess early on in research, but it's been shown that now they can reproduce on any host. There's areas in their native range where tree of heaven isn't present, and they're still able to survive. The tree of heaven improves their what's the word? It makes them more competitive. Like they definitely are improved in their egg laying capabilities by being able to feed on tree of heaven. And it's also thought too that there might be a degree of what's the word? Spotted lanternfly aren't toxic, but there might actually be metabolites from tree of heaven that are making them unpalatable to feed on. So it's actually like a survival mechanism for them to feed on tree of heaven for that reason. But yeah, they're fully capable of establishing and surviving without it.
Bummer, because we don't have a ton of tree of heaven in Garrett County, so that's kind of what we were hoping.
Yeah, and Garrett's climate might be different enough too that lanternfly couldn't survive. But they've got them like in Ithaca, New York. They get them in areas where it gets chilly and nasty too. So Garrett may eventually develop a population. But yeah, I can't say I've ever seen too much tree of heaven driving around, McHenry and Oakland.
No, thankfully not. So, all right, great. So the other thing I had often heard was that they were unpalatable, like you were saying, like that if they were actually poisonous, like is what they hit, years ago, but I guess that's not.
Yeah, not poisonous. That's what we've had communicated to us, is that they're not a vector for any pathogen. They're not poisonous. People have complained about having like pets throw up after eating lanternfly. What we've been told is that that's usually, it's kind of the same thing with like cicadas, that pets can eat a lot of chitin, the exoskeleton, and it's very difficult to digest. So if they wolfed out a bunch of bugs, it gives you a stomach ache of undigestible junk, and then you barf it back up. We've not gotten any reports, nor has any research indicated that lanternfly is going to like poison a pet and kill them. The one thing I always would recommend to people is that lanternflies are wild animals, and insects are very notorious for carrying a lot of internal parasites, a lot of like flatworm, pinworm kind of stuff, roundworm kind of stuff. So just, keep up with those vet visits, dewormers occasionally. It's always worth it. But that'd be the same if your dog was eating dead junk it found out in the woods too, or eating any other kind of insect. Just good to stay up on your pet's health.
Sure. Another good question that came in as a private message. We have a lot of maple syrup production here in like Garrett County. So this is something that like maple syrup producers should be, concerned about?
It doesn't seem like it. We've really not gotten any indications that they care very much about sugar maple, and I don't know why. I mean, you'd figure a more sugary tree would be more desirable for them, but we usually keep an eye out for reds and silvers, and they don't seem to bother sugars much at all. Especially given the kind of environment they would have. I would expect populations to be really widely distributed because there's not a lot of tree of heaven. Once you get outside city limits, it would probably thin out much more and would reduce pressure on any tree being fed on. So I would say maple producers, syrup producers are probably fine.
Awesome. Good to know. Okay, there's a couple more here. How does an infestation map of neighboring states look?
So for PA, I actually can't speak to like where they're exactly finding insects. It's going to be a matter of where they place their quarantines, which is basically the entire border with Maryland. So anywhere you go in PA is going to be infested. The further east you go, the worse it gets. But as far as like where they're finding population centers of lanternfly, that is, excuse me, I don't know exactly where they are. In West Virginia, they are in the area of let's see, it's in the Panhandle. So that's like Jefferson County, the other two that are around there. But yeah, that's going to be in the eastern Panhandle of West Virginia is where they're finding them.
All right, great. And the last question I had for you is, you talked a little bit about like products that are under the quarantine that can't be moved. Is that all on the website, like of what those products are?
Yeah, there's kind of a general list. It is a very broad list, and I understand the degree of difficulty that might be in like trying to follow every letter of the order. So what I'm looking for is a good faith effort for people to check what they have. Basically, a regulated article technically can be anything that an agricultural inspector deems capable of moving lanternfly, and lanternfly themselves are a regulated article. So it can be any vehicle, anything that can have lanternfly on it. But the kind of stuff we're really worried about is going to be like stuff in like nursery materials or construction materials, like big trailers, tractor trailers of stuff being hauled around where lanternfly could have gotten onto the container and are getting shipped along. Especially with rail is the big one. They'll go and jump onto rail cars that sit still for a little while and just get transported way down the line. Like when it comes to private residents, the general public, your risk of transmission is probably lower. That said, we've seen lanternfly pop up in weird residential areas, and come to find out the people that, live in those locations also like work in Philadelphia or something and brought it back to like northern Baltimore County. And it's like, oh yeah, that's why it happened. That's how we got an infestation in Wycomico County, was the location is a summer home for people that live in Philly, and Philly has a huge infestation. So it's like, it still happens, they get around. But yeah, the list is very broad. There's some examples in the quarantine order. If people go to our website, you can see it. But we're looking for a good faith effort as opposed to strict adherence. We understand the difficulty in trying to look for these bugs.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. If there's any other questions, go ahead and enter them in the chat. Kenton, that was wonderful. I know I learned a lot, and it's always great to hear that perspective of, specific to Western Maryland and what we should be looking for. So I really appreciate your time with this and sharing some great information. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Glad to be here.
All right, guys, if you have any other questions, go ahead and enter them. Otherwise, we will be in touch soon. Kenton is going to review the recording, and then if possible, we will try to send it out if we can. So, all right, everyone. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time today.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.